Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the death toll from Cyclone Freddy in Mozambique rises to 63, whilst in Malawi, 2 weeks of mourning are announced as the government launches an international appeal for help with the storm's aftermath. There, 225 were killed. Also, the WHO calls on rich countries attracting health workers from across the continent to manage that brain drain more responsibly. Almost 70% of countries with a severe shortage of health workers are from the continent. And FIFA's big meet rolls into Rwanda. The World Governing Football Association's Congress is due to be held in Kigali, bringing together thousands of delegates from member associations around the world. We take a sneak peek in the run-up to that. But first, after days of battering southern Africa, Cyclone Freddy began to abate on Wednesday, but the region's also braced for the fallout from its devastating aftermath. 225 people were killed in Malawi after the storm returned for the second time in less than 3 weeks over the weekend. Tens of thousands have been affected. On Wednesday, President Lazarus Chakwera attended a funeral for victims and announced that there would be 2 weeks of mourning. He's also said that the scale of the destruction is greater than the country can cope with alone.
Malawi is in a state of disaster. What Cyclone Freddy has done is to pull us back even when we were trying to rebuild because of past tragedies. And I appeal to the international community to please look at us with such favor because we need help. We need help in terms of people that have been rescued, who have lost everything, needing what is necessary: shelter, clothing, food.
Meanwhile, at least 53 people were killed in neighbouring Mozambique. Almost 90,000 people have been displaced by the storm, and there are fears that a cholera outbreak could still pick up pace. Meanwhile, police and soldiers are still struggling to carry out search and rescue operations.
It's a very troubling and very difficult situation. There are challenges with access to the area. So the flooding has impacted or has blocked the main trunk road, the N1, which runs up and down the country. That's going to make it hard to get supplies in and to get relief to the people in need. There are many people, in need of very basic things like shelter, people whose homes have been destroyed, and clean water. Is only just starting to be restored to the city today, and many people are still drinking rainwater or even standing water on the ground. The country is already facing a cholera outbreak with about 8,700 cases, recording about 1,000 cases a week at the moment, which is extremely concerning, particularly for children. Diarrhea will likely tick up as people don't have access to clean and running water. And also malaria, of course, is a big risk when you have large quantities of standing water around for mosquitoes to breed in. So many compounding components to this crisis, very serious situation for children and families.
Now, most of the countries that the World Health Organization has flagged for having a shortfall in healthcare workers are in Africa. Out of 55 nations identified this week, 37 are on the continent. They include top economies like Nigeria, Angola, and Ethiopia. Countries on the list fall below the global median of about 49 doctors, nurses, or midwives per 10,000 people. For some, the low ratios were made worse by the pandemic, in which some healthcare workers died or developed depression because of the pressures. It also, though, prompted more international recruitment of healthcare workers from Africa. The WHO wants rich countries to approach the practice more responsibly. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Jim Campbell from the WHO, who told me more about the impact that the shortfall in healthcare workers has on those countries where access to care is stretched particularly thin.
The challenge in numbers are very, very, very simple. If you look at the 55 countries that have been identified here, life expectancy is on average 64 years. That's 8 years less than the global average and 17 years less than in high-income countries. In the same countries you have, like you said, it's below the average, but that's coming to around about 15 health workers per 10,000 population, which is about one now health worker for every 700 inhabitants. High-income countries have 10 times more than that. So we're really sort of suggesting that there needs to be some reflection before international recruitment is taking place, because there is no health without health workers in a country to provide access to care.
So you touched upon the issue of brain drain there a little. That thousands of healthcare workers have left the continent over the last couple of years. We heard just last year the president of Zimbabwe mentioning even the possibility of being compensated by the WHO for the number of the country's healthcare workers that were being shipped out elsewhere. Now, obviously, that is a problem. But surely there are, it's a huge nuanced issue. What are the other reasons that feed into the continent having such a pronounced shortfall in this key sector?
Exactly. You're absolutely right, George. It's a very nuanced, complex issue. Zimbabwe, you mentioned there, is one of the countries that we have added to the support and safeguards list this year. That recognizes the impact of the pandemic, the additional vulnerabilities that have been experienced, and the high levels of out-migration that Zimbabwe has notified the World Health Organization of. We welcome the leadership from the president, the vice president on this issue. It needs senior political leadership to look at the challenge of how we recover from the pandemic. But it is a nuanced issue. In low and middle income countries, roughly 1 in every 100 jobs is in the health and care economy. In high income countries, that's 1 in 10 jobs. So it really is the size of the sector is not yet in the necessary capacity to respond to population needs. That's production, that's fiscal space, that's the ability to create jobs and pay wages. It is a complex issue, and there are opportunities from the evidence to make some changes.
So what will it take to boost the number of healthcare workers on the continent and give us a sense of what those countries that are not on your list are doing right?
So what will it take? We've got the evidence from the pandemic, and we believe over the last 10 years, what more countries need to be doing. They need to produce, to graduate, educate more health professionals and to sort of scale up the education. They need to link that with increasing the number of jobs. That means creating additional public resources to go into the health economy, to pay those wages of those workers once they graduate. For some countries, that will require, in Africa, that will require greater use of domestic resources. For others, it requires international solidarity. We need to see all available resources from official development assistance and international financing institutions creating this human capital, creating jobs and sustaining those jobs.
Dr. Jim Campbell there. Now, whilst on a trip to Ethiopia, the US Secretary of State has said that greater economic relations with the country depended on a serious push for accountability and reconciliation following the civil war that shook it for 2 years until last November's peace agreement. Antony Blinken met with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and with representatives of the northern region of Tigray, which was on the other side of the conflict that became one of the deadliest of the century. The US has also announced new humanitarian assistance for Ethiopia worth more than $331 million. Now, on Thursday, Rwanda will be hosting the 73rd FIFA Congress. Delegations from 211 countries have arrived in Kigali and are ready to vote on measures for the next few years. 54 are from the continent. Morocco has already announced that it will be submitting a joint bid with Spain and Portugal to host the World Cup in 2030. Football development plans, including in Africa, will be at the centre of talks. Our Clément de Roma brings us this look ahead.
Despite a national team ranked 137th in the world last year, Rwanda is hosting the Football Federation Mass this Thursday. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has no competition and will therefore be re-elected. And he knows the city well here. He even set up FIFA regional office here in 2021 after Senegal and South Africa. During his first mandate, Infantino declared himself the candidate of Africa and has great supporters on the continent, including the Rwandan president Paul Kagame. He's been pushing for more partnerships in the football world. The Visit Rwanda logo has been used on the shirts of the Arsenal and Paris Saint-Germain teams. FIFA also invests extensively in the country.
It's a historic moment that a FIFA president is elected on African soil. So it's good news for African football, for the people and the Rwandan government. We have development projects here with the federation. A new stadium is being built. It's important to do things outside of Europe or North and South America.
Another highlight of this summit, a hope for compensation for migrant workers, some of whom came from Africa, who were killed and injured during the construction frenzy ahead of the World Cup in Qatar last year. Norwegian delegation is due to propose the creation of an aid fund for these workers on Thursday, a few days after the release of a petition by the NGOs Avaz and Amnesty International, which collected 1 million signatures.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.
Welcome to Tikrit, a city made famous by Saddam Hussein, who was born in the nearby village of Al-Awaja. This was his grave, but no one knows where or what's become of his tomb. The city is now the symbol of conflict between the former dictator's local Sunni supporters and pro-Iran Shiite militia. Tikrit revisited 20 years after the fall of Saddam Hussein on France 24 and France24.com.